NewsChannel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Good evening and welcome to OpenLine. I'm reporter Chris Davis sitting in for Rory Johnston tonight. Our topic is one that I think you'll really be interested in. It's been the talk of the week, really, in the world of the pandemic and health crisis. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine has been paused by the federal government as they review more about what's going on with some patients that have experienced blood clots. And with us to discuss this is Dr. David Aronoff of Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Dr. Aronoff has been a reliable resource throughout the pandemic for us. Dr. Aronoff, I know a lot of people will have questions about this, but if we can kind of just set the stage on why the federal government decided that we needed to take a pause on this vaccine.
Yeah, well, first of all, Chris, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on, and I think it's a really important opportunity for us to communicate about what's going on, particularly with all the uncertainty around the Johnson & Johnson pause, as we'll say. So the basic idea here is that we are trying to get this pandemic behind us, in part by using vaccines. And it is really important that we're using vaccines that are both safe and effective. And we have an obligation to the public to make sure that we're monitoring vaccines to make sure that, in addition to protecting us, that if there's any signals of harm, particularly if those signals are dangerous signals of severe outcomes, that we're really taking that very seriously. So, for example, with the Johnson & Johnson experience in the United States, nearly 7 million doses of that vaccine had been administered, and there came to attention through the monitoring system that's run by the FDA of 6 cases of really severe blood clots. These are not run-of-the-mill blood clots that may appear in somebody's leg and cause swelling, but these were ones that were considered severe, and in fact, at least one person died from that. And while that may not all be due to these vaccines, having 6 severe cases associated with the vaccine use was enough to lead the government to say, we need to take a closer look at this. All of those cases occurred in women in sort of a reproductive age range of about 18 to 48 who had received the vaccines. And so the government wants to make sure that we know, is this something that should modify who gets the vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson, or not? Again, if these side effects or apparent side effects were not potentially life-threatening, I don't think there would have been a pause. But that's basically what's going on. This is still a very, very safe vaccine, and we're talking about an event that at first blush appears to be occurring at less than 1 in a million frequency.
Absolutely. I know this question has been touched upon a lot this week, but in case someone is new to this conversation, Dr. Aronoff, if someone has recently gotten the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, I know, if it's been a while, there aren't necessarily any lingering causes or effects you need to be paying attention to. But if someone has recently been vaccinated, are there any signs they should be looking out for?
Sure. So if somebody got the vaccine within the last few days, it's perfectly normal and natural to get some inflammatory response that may show up as body aches or headache and fever, not feeling well in general. The kinds of symptoms that may feel flu-like and usually respond to medications like ibuprofen or acetaminophen, which is Tylenol. But if you're a week out or up to 3 weeks out of that vaccine, so somewhere in the 1 to 3 weeks after vaccination, and you were to develop a new severe headache or new neurologic symptoms like weakness or numbness or blurred vision or severe abdominal pain or chest pain or shortness of breath, those would be the kind of symptoms that would be abnormal after a vaccine of any kind and should lead you to seeking medical attention.
And so, Dr. Aronoff, I want to really stress this before we get to some of our calls. I think a natural response for some people that may have been a little hesitant to begin with, they may say, this is exactly the red flag I was worried about. What would be your advice to people that may be a little alarmed by this stoppage when it comes to getting vaccinated?
Yeah, so first of all, remember we're in the middle of a pandemic. COVID-19 is claiming the lives of somewhere between 1 and 2 out of every 100 people who are diagnosed with this infection in the United States. And we've almost hit 600,000 lives lost from COVID-19. Our hospital still has people struggling to live, and we have vaccines that have now been given to nearly 200 million doses. Over 120 million people have now had at least their first dose of vaccine. And these are proving to be both safe and effective. And what we're talking about with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are potentially severe adverse events that may have occurred in about 1 in a million shots. And that, in the grand scope of things, is much, much, much lower risk to people than COVID-19 itself, and in fact is on par with risk of many everyday activities.
Absolutely. Well, the beauty of OpenLine is it's not just my questions. We want to bring in some of your calls as well. Ron, I believe you're on the line with us. Can you go ahead and ask your question or make your comment?
Yes, sir. Hang on, dude. Okay. Just a question. I've asked this a few times on this same station we're talking on. As far as different blood types not getting corona or, not having real bad symptoms and actually not even getting it, I guess. The difference is it A positive, O negative, or whatever. And the next question is blood types that are having the blood clots. Is that maybe that may have something to do with it? I'm going to hang up and listen to you.
All right. Thank you, Ron. Yeah, and I know that's not the first time I've heard that question out there just in general about coronavirus and blood types. Dr. Aaronoff, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, Ron, thank you for calling in with that question. It's really important. There's some controversy as to whether it's protective or not to be of a specific blood type. And obviously, that's not something that we can easily change. It is possible for people of any blood type to get infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, to be contagious, to pass it on to someone else. And if you have risk factors for doing poorly with COVID-19, having diabetes, high blood pressure, being older than 65, it really doesn't matter what your blood type is. You're still in those high-risk groups. So far, Ron, we do not have evidence that if you are a particular blood type, that you are or are not at risk for blood clots from these vaccines, for example. And in part, that's because these blood clots that are associated with, for example, the J&J vaccine are so rare. So far, we've only heard about 6 cases that we really don't have enough information to know if things like blood type might be related to risk. But thank you for that question.
Absolutely. We'll move right along to Mike. Mike, go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah, good evening to you, sir, and good evening to the doctor. Doctor, I'm going to ask you 3 bullet questions, and they're going to be quick, and I'm going to hang up and I'll listen to your response. First of all, why is Tennessee at one time, it might have been this year early on or last year early on, that we were indeed #1 in the world in daily COVID cases? Recently, I saw we ranked number 48 for not having as many vaccines as other states or cities. Maybe you can clarify that for me. But basically, I've had the first shot of Pfizer. I get my second Monday on the 19th. Basically, it's getting my life back. I see it as a key. I already feel better after getting the first shot, but this second shot is grabbing back a piece of my life, getting back out there, being more appreciative of the world that we live in. And I just think, I don't understand what we're doing wrong in the state of Tennessee, not even comparing to faraway states, but just comparing to simple states like Kentucky. I always thought we were a little bit more progressive than Kentucky, even though they're more north. Like I said, I've had a family member to die of this last year. What is wrong with our governor, or what is wrong with Tennessee? And outside of that, you're doing a good job, and also that Dr. over at Lentz Health Center, who's in charge. Both of you guys are very smart, but can you explain why the rest of the state might not be so in the political realm? And you guys have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate the call. Dr. Aaronoff?
Yeah, so first of all, Mike, again, thank you very much for calling, and I'm very sorry about the loss in your family to COVID. And unfortunately, that's a very familiar refrain that we hear all across the state and across the United States, that people either know somebody or are related to somebody who's gotten very ill or died from COVID-19. And you're exactly right. We need to get people vaccinated. The way that we're going to stop this virus from spreading so much from person to person to person is by inducing immunity in people. When we get the vaccine, it is harder for us to get infected. It's not impossible to get infected, and we can talk about that, but it is much harder to get infected if you've been vaccinated. And that makes it hard for the virus to find somebody to infect if everyone is vaccinated. So you're exactly right. Every state has been struggling with getting their populations vaccinated, and that's for complex reasons, not only the supply of vaccines, but advertising, getting people to be able to schedule their vaccines in a timely manner. I'm excited that I heard today, as I think many of you did, that starting on Monday, I think something around 500 people are going to be able to get walk-up vaccines at the Music City Center. And I think those kind of efforts to get anybody 16 years of age or older vaccinated who wants to get vaccinated is going to bring Tennessee up into those states that are among the best in terms of vaccine coverage.
Absolutely. You're exactly right, Dr. Aaronoff. They announced this morning in the COVID-19 briefing from the city that they will officially, starting Monday, allow up to 500 people a day to walk into the Music City Center to be able to get walk-in vaccines. They say if you can go ahead and plan ahead and make an appointment, that makes it a little bit easier on their end. But, you know, I think this kind of brings up an interesting point, Dr. Aaronoff, and we finally have gotten to the point where we have enough supply where this is possible. And a lot of people with jobs may not be able to just go ahead and plan out their day completely, but having these walk-in opportunities may open up an opportunity for them.
Oh, I can't agree more, Chris. That's really convenience. Is what it's all about, and that's why I'm hoping actually that the J&J vaccine is able to be brought online. It is an effective and safe vaccine, and that having that possibility of a single shot vaccine for people, particularly people who work full-time or have transportation difficulties, is really important. Not everybody can afford the time that it takes or the ability to go get 2 shots of a vaccine. So the simpler we can make that, the better.
Absolutely. I want to go ahead and bring in Ann, who is calling in with a comment or question. Ann, go ahead.
Good evening. My question is, I suffer from autoimmune disorders, and I encourage everyone that can take the vaccine to take it. I was extremely relieved when I was able to do it, and I took the Moderna, and with the second injection or shot, it did stimulate an autoimmune response with my lupus, and I was very symptomatic for 5 to 7 days, with symptoms that I recognized very quickly and was able to get in touch with my doctor, and it was worth it to me not to be a shut-in in my home anymore and to have that relief. My question for you, Dr. Aaronoff, is I'm already looking to the future, and if a booster shot comes out, do I need to be thinking ahead and expect an even bigger immune response if I get a booster shot? Autoimmune people aren't in the test studies, so we don't know how those people respond. But if I responded that way to the vaccine, would I respond even more severely if I'm given a booster in the future? And that's my question. And thank you for everything you've done to get the vaccines given here in Tennessee. It has made a world of difference for all of us. Thank you.
And thanks so much for your call. Dr. Aaronoff?
Yeah, Ann, thank you very much for calling. And just like Mike, I want to thank you, Ann, for having the leadership of getting vaccinated and being among the first people to be getting vaccinated and demonstrating that that can be done safely. And, you know, your question is really an important one. We don't know yet when and whether we will have booster shots against future variants, for example, of SARS-CoV-2. So your question about whether you might have an even more of a boosted reaction, sort of like you did to the second dose of your Moderna shot to a booster, may depend on just how different that vaccine is from the first one or how long after your second shot. You know, this one you got 4 weeks after your first one. It may be that a booster isn't necessary until a year later. And so by that time, it may be that your immune system has sort of quieted down enough that your booster doesn't really do much more than your first shot did. But I think time is going to tell. What I can say is that if me getting a booster shot or all of us getting a booster shot every year or every 2 years will keep us from ever being in the same situation we have been in for the past 15 months, sign me up, absolutely.
Dr. Aaronoff, I think Ann's question actually segues into something I wanted to ask you about anyway, a little news of the day. Pfizer's CEO said today that there may be the need at some point, at least for the Pfizer vaccine, for some of those recipients to come back maybe 6 to 12 months later to be able to get another shot. Of course, we're kind of in uncharted territory here because we haven't necessarily done this with COVID-19 before and we don't know how long the vaccines last. What do you think the medical community is going to need to look at to know? Is it really going to, or do you need more time to be able to really know what this will look like moving forward on if more people will have to get vaccinated in more intervals or how long the efficacy will last?
Yeah, I mean, so far, and it's a great question, so far the clinical studies of Moderna and Pfizer show very, very strong, persistent, sustained immune responses out to 6 months, and we'll be continuing to see more data come out as time goes by. I think the real question is going to be if any of these variants or new variants of the SARS-CoV-2 virus end up emerging for which these vaccines don't provide adequate coverage. So far, knock on wood, the current vaccines that we are using in the United States do provide protection against all of the variants that we are seeing in the United States. But in the future, we're going to have to continue to monitor, to sequence viruses that are isolated, be looking for any hot spots of new variants that crop up that might suggest to us that we are going to need a booster shot. But for now, I like what I'm seeing about how durable our immunity is to the vaccines.
Absolutely. That is great to hear. I want to go ahead and bring in Lucy to the conversation. Lucy, go ahead.
Hey, Doc, what's up? I have a couple of questions here and a comment or two. But is it me or is it just me? You know, I think it's kind of ironic that, you know, this virus causes clots and it resides in bats. It's a kind of a bat-borne virus. And when you use bat venom, I think that's a proper term for it, to bust clots in the ER, you know, for stroke patients, I just think that is just so weird that, you know, something that comes from bats now is caused a virus that's causing these clots. You know, Nashville is a pretty big crossroads. MTSU did a study back in the late 80s, early 90s, where they showed how much traffic relative to the rest of this country comes through this area. This is not Bean Station. And I think people need to take some precautions and really look at taking this inoculation for this virus. And like you said, put it behind us and try to get ahead of it. What I need you to explain is, you know, we're talking 3 different types of vaccinations. And I know the Johnson & Johnson's a little different from the other 2. And people have talked about having their DNA changed or whatnot. Now, here's my question. The first 2 inoculations that came out, were they made by CRISPR or made with CRISPR? And if they were, can you kind of point out, if you know, what other things we've used CRISPR for in the past few years to use with DNA, you know, making things right with DNA? And what's the difference between, I don't know the name of it, Moderna and the other one, as opposed to what Johnson & Johnson's vaccination is? I hate to be so nerdy or whatnot, but, you know, I'm just that way. and hey, I know y'all were dropped on the ground running to try to get ahead of this thing, and you got a late start. A lot of things held you up, and I really do appreciate you, and I appreciate Dolly Parton for donating money to get y'all the machine over there at Vanderbilt, because it helps us here. And you know, if Nashville's not careful, we could be the V as in vector to spread this thing, mutation after mutation after mutation, until we get ahead of it. And that's what I'm concerned about. Thanks. I'll take your answers offline. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Lucy, thank you so much. You know, if you're coming here to ask a nerdy question, I think Dr. Aaronoff is probably your person. He knows more about this than a lot of people here in Nashville. Dr. Aaronoff, a couple things that Lucy mentioned, but I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy, for asking your question. So first of all, that technology that you referred to called CRISPR was not used to make the vaccines that we're currently using. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are what we call mRNA vaccines, and these are fully synthetic, very tiny pieces of RNA that when they get into our muscle cells or the immune cells near our muscle cells, that triggers an immune response against just one component of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is called the spike protein. If you look at the virus under the microscope, it's like a shell, a circle, a sphere with these little spikes coming out of it. And those spikes are sort of like the Velcro that virus uses to stick to our cells and cause infection. And if we can mount antibodies against those spike proteins, then when we get infected with the virus, those antibodies coat that Velcro, sort of like rubbing petroleum jelly on a piece of Velcro. It loses its stickiness. And that's what the vaccines are designed to do, is to make our body generate what are called antibodies that would bind to those sticky spikes on the outside of the virus and protect us and prevent the virus from causing infection or causing severe infection in us, which is exactly what happens. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine. It's called an attenuated adenovirus vaccine. It uses an adenovirus, which causes the common cold, but that virus cannot replicate, it cannot divide in our bodies, but it brings in the message for this spike protein and again, instructs our immune system to make antibodies against the spike protein. The key here is we all need to get vaccinated. Anyone who's eligible for vaccine should get vaccinated for two reasons. One is those vaccines protect us from getting sick, and two is by multiple people getting immune to this virus, we will prevent the pandemic from keeping spreading. We will stop it in its tracks and get our businesses open, get our schools fully open, and get things back to like they were in the old days of 2019.
The old days, those sound great. And it seems like, you know, with this, we're well on the path to do so. We've got to take a quick break, but we'll have more questions and answers right after the break.